Hi everyone. Good morning. Um, I'm Ebrahim. I guess this is going to be more interactive than kind of me delivering things. Okay. And I imagine I have to use this mic. Huh? Oh shit. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So apparently I have to stand before the camera, something I'm not used to, and um, I can't move around too much, and I have to use the mic, which makes it slightly awkward. Because my intention was to have a much more interactive session, and we'll try and do that as much as possible. So, what we're going to do is try to go through a whole bunch of concepts. For some of you, it's going to be very familiar. For some of you, it might not be familiar. But there are no right or wrong answers. Okay? So, please feel free to say what you want to say or differ, even with me, surprising as that may sound. And feel free to interject. Okay, just as Angelo said, interject in a way which is meaningful and not disruptive to someone who's actually speaking at the time. Right. So, we're also going to talk a lot about things which can be fairly contentious because we're talking about politics. What's the idea of politics or governance and government, and so on. And as you might imagine, many of those discussions can become quite heated, right? Because you all have different sets of political beliefs. So try to be mutually respectful, even if you disagree with what someone is saying and you have a different take. You will have your opportunity to give your take. So, how many of you studying politics or studied politics? Gosh. Okay, so I don't need to be here then. One of you can take over. If there's so many who do understand what do we mean by what do we understand by politics? If someone says we're talking about politics, what would you convey to someone if they had to ask you what is politics? No, you can't volunteer other people to answer, buddy. You must answer for you. She'll answer for her. Go ahead. So a discussion of who will get how, who will, a discussion of who will get what and how, or people act. Okay, all right. So there's two dimensions. Sorry, what one? No. So who's gonna get what and why, and the process. So there's one. I don't know if there's a duster here. Okay. So one important word, right? The question of process, and then there's process, and then there's distribution, right? Process, distribution. Who gets, or the process of who gets what and why. Now, in the process of who getting what, obviously a decision has to be made, right? So there's a third dimension now. Someone has to make a decision. Takira, you wanted to say something. So he was just volunteering you. He just saw your hand. Okay. Anyone else about the? You all heard that, right? It's about the exercise of power. So now we've got several different dimensions. Making a decision, the making of decision has to go through a process, right? And someone now said that there's the question of power or the exercise of power. What about governance? So now you've added a new idea, control. Maybe there was another hint. Yeah, yeah. So some of you are saying it's about affairs of the country. That's what you're telling me. So are you telling me in this room now there's no politics? What? So if you take the very first thing that your colleague said, it's about who gets what and why, right? And a process. So we're saying that there is a way in which we come to decisions about who gets what and why. Some of you said it's about the affairs of the country or the state or the government. In part, that's true. But governance is different, or government is different from politics. Government is the administration of power, or the management of power, or the management of process. Right? But politics generally is not just about formal processes, there's also a process of influence. So if we talk about this room that we're in, there's a form of politics going on, isn't there? It's not formal. It's not formal politics with a big P. Maybe politics with a small p. So there's a degree of influence going on. But in the process of exercising influence, so let's get back to the question of what's going on in this room. Are there politics in this room? In what way? I see there's only the left and the right who are answering. The people in the center are all very quiet. In this room? No, no, I'm asking, are there politics in this room? How? In what way? Mhm. But in this room, okay, so what's the identity politics in this room? There, now, there is an important word, the question of authority. So just think about the question of authority, right? Okay, so in what way is there politics between you and I now? Hmm. But what I mean, but people who walking outside in the passage, who talking to each other, may also be influencing each other. Is there politics in that room, in that interaction? How? Okay, so they're trying to influence each other, right? But in this room, there's something more formal, isn't there? Because he said, I've got authority, I have power. Okay, so you're taking us a little bit, I don't want to go so far ahead, right? Let's just take small steps. So we're just trying to get some greater precision about the concept or the idea. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Yeah. Mm, I don't know. What do you think? No, tell me what you think. Do you think politics can happen with just one person? How? There's always too much politics. So what he said, right? Who gets what, when, how? Okay, so some of you got. By the way, did you all get the handout? Some of you got the handout. I know there were 8 people who probably might not have. But did you all get circulated a handout with 2 tables? No? Okay, you will receive it at some point. No, that's the program. So can there be politics with one person? And it's a very good question. And the reason I wanted to ask that is because it's the next point we go to. Can there be politics with one person? How? How? Yes, that's true, but that's just beliefs. If you're one person alone, because that's your question, isn't it? You're one person alone. Can you have politics? But in response to the question, can politics happen with just one person? You're saying no. No, but how? You just told me that it's about other people and government and who's supposed to get what. Oh, that's a personal conviction. That's an internal personal conflict. Am I right? It's not about you interacting with someone else. So if you take his definition, who gets what, when, where? Are you saying there's politics between my hands should write, my eyes should see, my brain should compute? But between who and who? Between your body and your soul. But surely your subjectivity is dependent on in relation to someone or something else, isn't it? How do you talk about your subjectivity in isolation or outside of a relationship with anyone or anything else? I'm just posing questions. Yeah, you as a person can be political, but as his question is a very narrow one. Can one individual person so strip a person from everything else? Okay, they're alone on an island, alone, soul alone. Is there politics? Hmm? Yeah, how? Hmm. So I think he's absolutely right. So you're both right in a sense. If you're an individual, you have to make allocative decisions. You have to make allocative decisions about whether you must have coconuts or bananas, or how much water you must drink because you may run out of it, etc. But this is all about your person. It's about the individual. It's not about how you relate to other people. Now, when we think of politics, right? Yes, the individual matters, but there's no politics between an individual within themselves. So, in one sense, the technical terminology is that politics is immanent to everyone. That means it is within you, but it only expresses itself when you are in relation to other people. So, the very idea of politics means that there has to be a form of community, even if it's two people, because then you're now having a relationship between two people about whether who gets what, about how you go about deciding who gets what. Now you add a third person, and you've got three different people who now have to define a process by which they have to reach decisions about who gets what and how and so on. Right? So to answer your question, no, I don't think that there is politics between or within one person on their own. So, obviously, this must bring up to you the idea that politics is also about the duality of inclusion and exclusion. So, any one of the definitions you take, whether it's about who gets what, when, and how, or the process by which you make decisions, then it implies some sort of power or influence. Now, power and influence are related. Power is about the formal exercise of influence. So, let me ask this question. Are newspapers political? Is the media political? Yes, in the formal sense of power with a big P or power with a small p? Small p, because it's exercising influence. It has no formal role. And remember the word he used, authority. They may be authoritative, but in making public decisions about who gets what, when, they might influence how that happens, but they don't have the power to decide. Right. So let's go back to the idea of this very room itself. Right. How is power constituted in this rule? Yeah, in a physical sense, yes. But you applied to come on this program, didn't you? So you consented. What did you do? You voluntarily said, I will go. But when you voluntarily said you would go, you knew that there is a set of rules, a framework. So here's the fifth big thing: rules. So you spoke about process. Process means that you will develop rules or guidelines for how you're going to go about doing certain things. Now, think about the idea of consent. You consent, you apply to come here. Implied in your giving of consent is a framework, a set of rules by which you have to abide by. So you have to rock up here at 8:30. You will have certain breaks. You have expectations, isn't it? And those expectations are what? What are your expectations when you come here? That there will be someone talking to you or someone facilitating the session, or you will have an opportunity to speak and they will say something to you. Now, what would happen if you came here and there was no one here? Then what? Hmm? Yes, you'll be angry. Okay. Then what are you going to do? You're going to burn down the lecture hall. Okay. Then you'll go home. You'll just go home, Jay, just like that. Uh, you go to reception. Why reception? Power. I don't know if they have power. What does reception have to do with what we're doing? Mm-mm. In this room. Okay, so if I were not here and Angelo were not here, who did you apply to when you wanted to come to the program? Yeah, but surely there were names on the website, right? There she's sitting, and there's he sitting. Those are the two people you spoke to, isn't it? So they have the authority. So what would you do if there was no one here? You would go to them and say, listen, buddy, you said we will come here at 8:30 and we will have a program. But there isn't. So you go to who has the authority. Karuna has the authority. Muhammad have the authority because they convened the program. And so if I was supposed to be here and I were not here, then what would happen? You would go report me to them, and they would then be able to, or should be able to, hold me to account. So you see the idea of oversight and the idea of accountability. But equally, when you come here, can you just do as you please? No. What must you do? Hmm? Follow the rules. But what if the rules don't make sense to you? And what are those rules? No, you can't whisper. See, one of the rules is that you can't talk to yourself because we're in a group here, so you must speak to everyone. But what if they're boring? Okay, so underpinning the set of rules are a set of responsibilities that you have. But does that mean that you only have responsibilities? No, you have rights, right? Your rights are that you come here and you expect that there is someone who will be speaking or convening a program or giving you something or giving you the chance to speak or giving you something to read. So you expect that when you come here, someone has obligations to you, but their obligations to you are also dependent on your responsibilities in relation to what you're supposed to do. So, the short point I'm trying to make to you is that when people just throw out the word politics, try and get a better sense of what they actually mean. Right? So, politics, firstly, is contextually dependent. It depends on the context, it depends on the nature of the relationship. So, you will have informal politics, what we're calling informal politics, politics with the small p, which is about exercising influence. Politics with the big P, which is formal politics, is about process, decision making, and the exercise of power. Now, obviously, there's a relationship between the exercise of influence and the exercise of power. The exercise of influence happens in all kinds of ways. In some sense, there's a politics going on here in a way in which I'm trying to exercise influence over you, but you also try to exercise influence over me. But in your exercising of influence, who has the formal power in the room right now? Me. I have the formal power, right? But my formal power, is it unlimited? Hmm? It's what? How? Okay. Okay. So after my time is over, which will be at 1 o'clock, for example. So in the afternoon, I can't tell you anything. I must just keep quiet. No, so the power in this room is that because I'm from the organization which convened this, we distribute power between Mohammed, myself, Angelo, Karuna, and anyone else who comes from the institutions who are convening this, right? Why? Because you voluntarily consented. Now, the idea of consent is important. Why is consent important? Let's go back to our very first point when we asked, or one of the first points, when we asked the question, can you have politics amongst yourself? No. And we said no. It has to be amongst a group of people. Now, when you gave your consent, you voluntarily gave your consent. Did someone force you? No. You voluntarily said, I'm going to go. When you voluntarily said you're going to go, you signed up to saying, I will respect the rules which are created. So the framework of the rules are what I'm going to sign up to. So I can't rock up when I want. I can't leave when I like. I can't be disruptive. I can't be abusive. You can't be all of those things. And though I have the formal authority or power with the big P at the moment, do I have unlimited power? No. My power is checked both by Karuna, by Muhammad, but also by yourself. Now, how do you check my power? How do you check my power? Speak, you don't have to wait. Yeah, in part. But in part, you could also, if I just decided to come here and walk around and say nothing and deliver no content, you could go moan, right? Or you could complain, or you could throw things at me. It's protest, or leave. But if you leave, you can't just leave. Surely they have to come to you or to Karuna or Angelo and not only seek permission to leave, but have to first check what's going on. What's the story? Why is this oak just walking around? Well, not the right to free speech. If I step outside the bounds of my authority. So if I took this glass and I don't like something that you say and I chuck it to you, I'm stepping outside the bounds of my authority. My authority don't allow me to do that. You then have to kick in processes of oversight. You can go complain, you can lay a charge, you can ask for me to be disciplined. Angelo used a nice word. He said, "You all mustn't be what?" Or it wasn't a word, it's a proper noun. You all mustn't be Stalin. Oh. Well, if you want to be Zodwas, that's fine. But you mustn't be Stalins. Because the Stalin approach would be I have the power, you don't speak until I'm finished, I do what I want. If I want to come here and talk about photosynthesis instead of politics or governance, there's nothing you can say. Because that's the absolute exercise of authority. Because you fused all the authority in one place. Now, when I or if I do something wrong, right? What did I say? Who can you go to? Or, right? Why? Because they are all responsible for different types of things. So there's a distribution. Now, be careful here. There's the distribution of authority, not necessarily a distribution of power. The power is distributed amongst all of us, but authority and responsibility has been distributed amongst the three of them. So, if the facilities in this room don't work, or the room was not open, or the room was not warm enough, or none of the preparation which needed to have happened had happened, who would you go complain to? Karuna. Why? Because she's responsible for those aspects. But if someone who was meant to deliver content here and didn't deliver the content, who are you going to go to? To Muhammad. So you see, there's a distribution not just of authority, but also a distribution of responsibility. So, in engaging in any form of politics or authority, knowing who is responsible for what matters because that's the only way in which you can exercise accountability. But also, it's the only way in which oversight can be exercised. So, you all see this fellow behind the camera, Mr. Bata. Formally, he has no power or authority. So, if I don't do anything, if I did something wrong here, can you go moan to him? No, because if he came to tell me something, I'll just swear at him. Or if any one of you. So, do you see how the question of authority is not just the distribution of responsibility, it's also the distribution of oversight and specific lines of accountability. So, if some arbitrary professor was walking around here and wanted to exercise oversight over me, am I responsible to report to them? Huh? No, because they have no authority over me. Now, let's come back to this question of politics, right? We've already come to the idea that politics can mean very many different things. They also operate in different contexts. And politics implies a set of relationships. And relationships imply the formation of a political community. Now, how a political community is formed matters a great deal because it's going to give us insight into one new concept. So, how does a political community form? How do you form a political community? Because we decided you can't just have politics if you're one person. How did we did do we in this room do we have a political community? Yes. Okay. You're saying yes, but he's not sure why. But what's the social justice in this room? What's just in this room? Who said nothing? And I'm asking you. You can ask me. I'm asking you. No, okay, no, wait. Let's just take one step back. You said we can't have because you agreed with me. You can't have politics if you're alone, right? Now I'm asking you, how do you form this political community? So you're saying, okay, so we'll forget the word political. How do you form community? Look on you. Did you all get that? Hmm? Do you agree? Good. No, but isn't that secondary? Doesn't that only happen after the community was formed? Like, sure. In part, yes. So you're not wrong. The idea of commonality is important, but I'm trying to understand to you what is the commonality in this room. Forget the idea of social justice. What is common in this room? I have more power. I didn't create the political community. Did I come and round all of you up and say, right, let's all get into this room? Think about that for a moment. There you go. You all consented to be here, right? So the community was formed on the basis. So I'm talking just about this room. Don't think about the beginning of the program. I'm just trying to convey to you the idea of how a political community is formed. A political community is formed, Zakira, you're right, on the basis of need partly, or the basis of some commonality. But that commonality has to be about what you wish to do together. So you commonly, all of you consented when you heard of this program to be a part of this group, right? Being part of this group meant that you subscribed voluntarily through your consent to the set of rules, to the framework, to what was going to happen. So someone from outside can't just wander in, can they? No. They're not part of our political community. They are excluded from it. They're not part of this political community. Can someone who's not slated to be on this program come and teach here or deliver a seminar? No, because they're not part of our political community. So political communities are formed on the basis of some commonly identified set of interests, right? It then has the function of inclusion and exclusion. Remember, I spoke about the duality of inclusion and exclusion. So the political community has to be formed on that basis of inclusion and exclusion. And the inclusion and exclusion happens on the basis of consent, because consent confers an important thing that Lucanio spoke about, legitimacy. Now, if you don't consent, so you consent to be born in South Africa? So what would you have wanted then? What? Wanted to be born in England? Yeah, you wouldn't know. So that's a separate biological fact. But that you are born into South Africa, you are now included in this political community, right? And automatically, therefore, you must subscribe to the set of rules. That set of rules is the constitution. And that is what creates the basis of the political community. So if two people or three people or four people were stranded on an island, to go back to that idea, they will have to, between themselves, create what you would call the social contract, contractarian, but that's contractarian theory, that they will have to, on a basis of common agreement, decide who should get what, when, how the resources will be used, who makes decisions about what, who builds the shelter, who contributes what to building the shelter, and so on. They will have to develop a set of rules, isn't it? But what if these people were really just terrible? All five or six of them were terrible people, and the one wanted to be dominant. Hmm? You could either have a dictatorship, sure, but what if the others fight back? Then what will you have? Conflict. So you're saying you'll have conflict because you don't have a political community? No, you're having a conflict because you got a political community. Actually, you're not having, yeah, you're having the conflict because the people are there together, not because they're apart. Yeah, good question. You well spotted. So there are two approaches to forming the political community. The one you've alerted already, contractarian approach. The other, and for those of you who, how many people in social science or humanities? John Locke, Thomas Hobbes. So what was this formula? I'm going to start with one word. Life is, complete the sentence. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. So if you didn't have the common set of rules, and those six people were on this island, and in Thakira's worldview, there must be, what did you say? Dominance, what? Dictatorship. Someone wants to dominate, right? Someone wants the power. So what are they going to do? It's going to go and murder the others. Why? Because he wants the power. Or he wants to be the, or she wants to be the only one making the decision, or telling everyone else what to do and how to do it. Or, in the case of scarcity, even getting rid of the others, right? Which is why the formulation came up that you need life. I mean, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Now, on the basis of that formulation, people come to the conclusion that you need a common set of rules which underpin how you relate to each other, and the rules must prescribe who is in and who is out for two different reasons. People have different reasons why they come to the conclusion that you need the contract. The one says, in order to mediate the conflict that happens between people who will want power or influence or authority, a set of rules must underpin how they go about doing so. The other approach says that we must have this common set of rules so that we can distribute power and distribute authority and find ways of working together. So you see, they both come to the same conclusion via different forms of reasoning. The one says we must have the common set of rules in order to promote cooperation. Yeah? And the other one says we must have the common set of rules. Why? To prevent conflict. Are you with me? Huh? Sure. Yes, you're not wrong. You're right. But I'm trying to convey to you the idea of the formation of the political community. Do you get what I'm do you get where we are? We're not you're about 5 steps ahead of us. We still very far behind you. We're just saying what's the basis of people coming together and why will they develop a common set of rules? We're saying there are two different approaches. The one says we must develop the common set of rules in order to promote cooperation. The other one says we must develop the common set of rules in order to prevent conflict. You with us? Okay. Did you take some steps back? I know we're slow. We all okay? Sure? Yeah. There's plenty other terms, but for our basic purposes, let's call it the preventative approach. Okay. So another housekeeping quickly. For those of you who need to go out, you must use the door at the back. The front door is closed because of the draft. Sure, this political community is quite accommodating. You make a small complaint about the draft and suddenly the front door is closed. So you have to use the back door. Okay. Right. So now, ma'am, you raised a very important question, but it's something we'll come to just now. It's the conception of democracy. So can you see that politics, right? So you were all right, is about acquiring power, using it. And why do you want to acquire and use power? Because you want to distribute resources. By resources, we also mean rights. Okay? Now, you can base it, there's the idealist conception that you want to do this because it's there's values I want to promote, or there's ideas I want to take root, like equality or freedom or liberty and so on. You could also want to do it, that's a values based approach. You could also want to do it because you want resources, you want power, you want influence. So politics is about values, it's about ideas, it's about things. But when we formalize it, it must follow a certain process. And the process that has to be followed is you need the process in order to be able to reach decisions. Now, when you say that you need a process in order to reach decisions, you are imposing a normative construct. You are imposing a set of values which you think will be good. Some of you might think it's bad, that's fine. But it is still normative. It is based on a set of beliefs. Now, when I say, so we just leave politics aside. If I use the word democracy, what do you understand by the word democracy? What's democracy? Choosing, choice, okay. So there's one aspect, choice. Yes, true. But just now you guys told me that politics can also be about someone having all the power. You're not wrong. I'm just saying that you're right. So there's a second element. One element said choice, another element said distributing power. But distributing power amongst who, Stu? So you're saying it's the majority must decide. What? That the majority must decide. Okay, so if majority rules, the majority of you decide, let's quit now for the day. Is that what we should do? No, but you guys, listen. You guys just told me. Don't add riders now. You just told me that a majority must decide, right? So I'm posing a question to you. The majority, we decide, hey, we tired. Let's take a vote. The majority of you decided, let's finish now at 11. Is that cool? Why? Ah, wait. It was what? You say it's a legitimate decision. So in your guys' conception, democracy is just majority rules. Anything that Stuart says about distributing power is out the window. But now, how must you include minority considerations? Because you just told me the majority must rule. So, okay, so here's the conflict. So now there's 30 of us in the room, right? 22 decide we must go, 8 decide we must stay. So, what do we do? stop right there. You all heard what he said, right? You all heard what Angelo's example and question. So here's Angelo's example. Will satisfy all your criteria. So out of the 30, 20 say, let's cook Ebrahim because he looks delicious. Right? It's for the common good because it's going to feed all of us. The minority, the other 10 who don't want to eat meat, have a voice. They're not silenced from saying, no, man, you can't eat humane, we're not cannibals, don't cook him, don't kill him. They have a voice. They can say what they want. The minority is heard. So all your criteria are satisfied. Everyone was included, right? There's a common purpose. Common purpose is to feed everyone. Common good. Everyone's going to be dead. No one is silenced. Everyone has a right to speak. No? No one. But you're telling me no, but why? Tell me why. But you decided that's the common good. The common good is our challenge is we gotta feed everyone. Just remember for a moment, as an aside, we're not talking about anything practical. We're talking purely about the idea. And I'm asking you, in idealist terms, what does democracy mean? We have one set of people who say it's about the majority must decide. Another one who said there must be a distribution of power and authority. And another set which is now raising model questions thanks to Angela. So now I don't know. The majority must decide and the majority rules. The minority has a voice, but they be overruled. Now you're talking about the objective, which objective must be served. So we're not worried about any of the actual practice. We're worried about its application now, from the spirit of what it means. I'm trying to get to what is the spirit of what this thing called democracy. What this thing called democracy means. Okay, what if the set of rules say that we must feed everyone, but you can't kill anyone? No, wait, hold on. No, oh, hold on. Let's just take her example, right? The example and mixing Angelo's example and what she says. She says, well, the minority must be heard. She's not. She didn't say the minority must not be heard. You are saying something different. You are saying that when a minority is heard, the minority's view must be the decision, because none of them are saying the minority must not be heard. Now you tell me why must they be heard, or you don't think they must be heard. Okay. Okay. So she says the minority must not be heard at all. But if no one's being heard, how do you know they're a minority? How do you know who's the majority and who's the minority? Shh. Yeah. Yeah, the point though is this is it. The minorities must be heard because we spoke about one aspect of democracy. You said choice, isn't it? You said choice. Puti? You said democracy is about choice. There's a second important aspect to democracy that is about voice. So two aspects, choice and voice. Reason. No, but that's not democracy now. Now you're getting into, you're going somewhere else. So, where does reason fit in? Well, this is precisely why you have democracy, because a part of democracy, when we say choice and we say voice, it is about public deliberation, about process of thinking about the choice you want to make, and then the aspect of giving voice to the choice you have made, or to allow, so it's elliptical, to allow the voice that you exercise to influence the choice that you eventually make. So again, like politics, democracy has five different elements. Okay, five. The first and the most basic is the right of the majority to decide. But importantly, as you correctly picked up, the right of the minority to be heard. Not that the minority must find its way into the decision, but the process of mediating between minority and majority is precisely why we have democracy, to create a platform for deliberation, argument, reasoning. But to underpin that, we must have process. So we are now imposing a normative set of values on process. Yes. Mm, mm. Exactly. And remember, that's why we spoke about the formation of a political community. In other words, a majority and a minority is constantly changing. A minority does and a majority does not remain fixed. And that's precisely why you have a democracy. Now, I know in South Africa, the use of the word minority and majority has peculiarly and overtly racial understandings. Get away from it. Get away from it. It's not always used in it was used in that way because of apartheid discourse. But in democracy or in democratic theory, the idea of minority and majority is not fixed, is not based on race, not always based on identity. It's about it's about numbers. Yeah, who constitutes the numbers and so on, of course, as societies evolve, take on specific identities. But in pure form, minority and majority have to do with opinion. Right. Now, any of the things we spoke about, right? You can't have it if you don't imbue people with rights, isn't it? So here's the fourth aspect of democracy, that it has it's about rights. And rights are underpinned by the concept or the notion of liberty and freedom. And secondly, equality. Now, note that equality in the democratic sense means the equality of rights, the equality to contribute to decision making, but it does not always mean equality in the distribution of resources. Because the distribution of resources is dependent on the way in which power is influenced and mediated. Okay, so democracy never gives rise, or can never give rise, to socio-economic equality, which is why you have things like the evolution and the development of the welfare state, or types of constitutions like ours, which try to impose on democracy, which is a good thing, not a bad thing, or tries to construct, perhaps impose is the wrong word, tries to impose the idea of social protection. Because imagine if we just left it to the mediation of minority and majority, those who are more powerful will always be more powerful. Those who are exploited will always be exploited, etc. Right? So you got the sense now that democracy has about 5 or 6 different elements. An important element is the question of the distribution of power or the distribution of authority. Now, on that unhappy note of you guys all wanting to eat me, shall we take a short break? 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Yes? 10? Yes, Papa. Shh. We're going to answer that question in the second part when we start talking about governance and effective governance. Right? We will answer those. The short answer is yes. And it's done so through the Constitution, through the set of rules. That's why the question of having a set of rules is important. Let's take a very quick example before we break. So, to majority of South Africans, would they like to have capital punishment, the death penalty? Huh? Yeah. The majority would like it, right? So who doesn't want it? A minority. No, a minority doesn't want it, and the constitution. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Why? Okay, I see. And if we have a referendum about gay rights, and the majority of South Africans says gays should not have rights, then what must we do? Yeah, so hence what? Hence we gays should not have rights. I'm asking you for an answer. No, 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 no. I'm asking you a specific question. Should gay people not have rights? Okay, but you just told me that certain things must be decided by the majority. The majority said no, they mustn't have rights. Hmm? So what if the question of hunger, must that, or the distribution of resources, must that be dealt with by the courts? Why not? No, but there's been popular opinion surveys which survey South Africans on a range of things, right? And the majority of South Africans would like to have capital punishment, would say that we should be like Uganda and there should be no gay rights, no gay marriage, no benefits to people in civil unions of that sort. So, yes, people have said so. No, the government hasn't. That's the question I'm asking you, is because he's asking a question. He's saying in company law, there's this thing that protects minority shareholders. Now we're talking about majorities and minorities in a democracy, right? So we're now asking the question again in pure thought about whether the majority is always right and the majority must always decide. So I'm putting to you two very contentious examples. A majority in a society say we should have the death penalty, and a majority also say that gays should not have rights. What do we do? Can we, like in company law, protect the rights of minority shareholders? Should hold it off. Short. So again, oh, hold on. Yeah. But see, there's the thing. So go back to the very early discussion we had about the formation of a political community based on what? So we have a political community based on two different approaches, right? A contractarian approach, which says let's develop a set of rules in order to prevent conflict. The other approach, let's have let's have a common set of rules to protect everyone and promote cooperation. Now, if you take again, without take leave aside the distinction between concord and constitution or rules, etc. His basic contention is that everything must be subjected to the majority because that's the argument he's making. Whether it's the limitation on capital punishment or the limitation on gay rights. He's saying there's certain things which must all just be put out to a majority. People in the society must decide. But here we're just pointing to you that sometimes the majority can make very bad or very poor decisions which neither prevent conflict or promote cooperation. Yeah, in practice, sure. Activism fits in to change. Now, here's the thing activism, activism either changes minds or changes systems, right? Now, in the case of gay rights, is there system change that needed or societal attitudes which need change? In our case, the system doesn't need changing. So the activism has to be directed to a specific end or a specific purpose. Calm down, calm down, calm down. Corona. Yes. You will after. Yeah, so we're not thinking about the practical application. Remember, we said there's nothing practical here. We're thinking about pure form. We're thinking about the idea. Right, you're absolutely right. But who is it that decides which those issues are? So let's take one step back. Who's the one who makes decisions about which issues must be put to popular referendum and which issues must not be? See again, so we're thinking again in pure thought. Who makes that decision? I leave you with that question. Mediate on that. Quarter
Morning,
past.
everyone. Um, I I'm Jerome September, for those who don't know, Dean of Student Affairs at WITS, and I'm just going to spend a minute or two, I guess, as part of the welcome, extended welcome, saying, firstly, thank you to the ASRI team for having agreed to do this in partnership with us, for having given up your time and your expertise to assist us on what I think is a journey. The few minutes that I've heard got me really excited because I think this is exactly the sort of thing that and discussions that we should create space for a lot more on our campus. Last week, someone asked me for a comment on the fact that some paper or there was some study that indicates that WITS produces the most millionaires in the country or something along those lines. And so a comment was asked of me because there's apparently another article coming sometime this week. And I want to share with you what my comment was because I think that's why programs like this is important. Firstly, I said, well, that's all well and great. It's good to know that our students and that we produce people who are very successful, at least in some respects, in terms of the money that they make. But I'd be very interested in a much deeper conversation about these millionaires and these majority millionaires that we are producing. Are we simply producing your ordinary run of the mill, the kind of millionaire that we all have been exposed to for all of our lives? The one who amass as much as they can for themselves and who lives the Instagram life, and we all kind of look at them, or some of us look at them with levels of envy because they seem to be living life to the fullest in that respect. Or are we producing millionaires who are beginning to help us challenge the major issues of inequality that we face in our country and in the world? And are they helping us to create a different kind of world? And a different kind of world is possibly the kind of world that none of us have ever experienced, but that all of us are kind of hoping for and working towards. So a more equal society, a world in which when we talk about the possibilities of opportunity, that those opportunities are actually real and material, the kind of world where women feel safe, the kind of world where, I mean, you've spoken earlier about gay rights, where the gay LGBTQI plus community may be a bit more safe. And when we talk about this idea of inclusion, that it's not women included into a man's world, and so kind of buckle up and join the club, but where we actually challenge the fundamentals of what it means to join this world. And so I hope that throughout this week that you will really embrace this journey. It will be a journey that you allow yourself the opportunity to challenge some of those things that you hold very dear as you begin to think through what this thing called social justice, what this thing for leadership in social justice is all about. And that by the end of this week, it won't just stay with yourself, but that we will become that you will become part of a group of people who will help us in a bigger sense think through this a lot deeper. Um, this is part of my passion, which is why I came. My master's was in human rights law, and so I'm particularly interested in issues of human rights and issues of social justice. For my doctoral program, I'm looking at inclusive universities, what that means, concepts around inclusive universities within the context of massification and social justice. And so I hope that as we move forward, that we will have many more of these, and that you would have found this week a valuable week, not as a sacrifice, but as an investment both in yourself and into the future of this country, the continent and the world. And that your leadership will not just be about, as I go towards my seat, that your leadership will not only be about being the best in the world, but that it will be about being the best for this world. So that when you leave this world, that the world would be a better place because of the contribution that you have made around some of the big issues that we face as a society. So thank you and welcome and all the best for the week. I will pop in and out again, I hope, as I'm able to, but I'm really excited about this. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. And I hope that any of you who planning to be part of the millionaires produced by Wits will remember us when you are. I told Professor Habib that I'm still waiting to be on the Forbes list. I'm hoping the first one I'll be on is the Sunday Times Rich list, then the Forbes list. But anyway, as you can see, I'm nowhere closer to that goal yet. Now, coming back to where we left off, I believe that in your email systems, you will get the full handout of what we've just been speaking about earlier, right? And what we're going to continue speaking about now. So I don't know if any of you got that handout yet. You do. Okay. So I want you to look at table 2. And I want to just take a step back. Now that we've discussed the idea of politics and the idea of democracy, right? And we introduced these notions of cooperation and conflict. Okay. You with me? Now, I often say, and you'll see in the handouts, that I speak about politics taking place on the basis of 5 different C's. Now, we've already spoken about 2 C's. What? Yeah, conflict, cooperation. What else can we talk about? Competition. Someone's been looking at the notes, ne? We can talk about competition. We can talk about consensus. And we can talk about cooperation. Now, if we remember what we said, what we say politics is about? Distribution of power, exercising of influence, distribution of resources, and making decisions. Now, if you think about those 5 C's, yeah, and we think about democracy, or we think about politics, because we are now saying we want to impose a set of normative values on politics, on how decisions are made, on how resources are distributed, on how we distribute things, who gets what, who's in, who's out. Remember the duality of inclusion and exclusion in the formation of the political community. Remember all that? Now, if you take these 5 C's, what's the worst? What's the worst form? Conflict. Conflict. Simply look at some parts of our continent itself and the extreme conflicts. Would you like to live in Somalia? Yes. Why? Who said yes? Why? So you want to go to hell, but what if you go there and you get sucked into the conflict? So you clearly don't want to be one of the millionaires. But if you need change, why won't you incept change through competition or cooperation? Why does it have to be conflict? Okay, so if you have too much competition, so are you saying competition is necessarily going to lead to conflict? Okay. Oh, so why is a soccer match a healthy conflict as opposed to other types of conflict? No, I don't want the conversation between the right and the left. I want the middle to also, the center to also say something. Huh? Oh, the center is the seat of power. Okay. Okay, related to his question about what's unfair or healthy or unhealthy competition, let me ask you this. Why is a soccer match healthy competition? Other than the fact that you're getting exercise, why is it healthy? Yeah. But what about the Roman gladiators? That was also sport, but they were fighting for their lives. Oh, so it's unhealthy because they were fighting for their lives. Okay. No, remember that. Hold on. Yes, sure. Okay, forget that. Again, you're taking it two steps too far. Just think of his example. Why is a soccer match healthy or unhealthy? It's 11 players, one ball, one referee, two linesmen. So you think the health or unhealth is dependent on the outcome? I don't agree, and I'll tell you why. Lucanio. No, but I mean, modern football is actually as much about the brawn as it is about the brain. I mean, it's about tactics, it's about planning. I mean, there are all kinds of interesting things which happen in modern football. Okay, so if there wasn't a referee, then what? Then you moor each other. Okay. Huh? Now, the reason I'm spending time on this question, because I think there's a very simple reason why soccer is healthy competition. Not because you're exercising, because there's a set of rules. That's why it's healthy competition. And that's why that form of competition doesn't spill over into conflict. So, competition does not always have to spill over into conflict, provided that there is a set of rules which underpin how things unfold. And in addition to the fact that there is a set of rules, so let's just take two scenarios. One, a soccer game in which there is a referee, and one, a soccer game in which there is no referee. It is perfectly possible when you play soccer on the streets that you all commonly understand the rules. You know when it's a goal and when it's not a goal. You know when it's an out ball and when it's not an out ball. Okay, you might have conflicts over whether it's an offside or not an offside, or a foul or not a foul. Then you will have real conflict. But generally, it is conceivable in theory that you could have a reasonable soccer game on the street even when there's no referee. It's possible, right? Why? Because you all understand a common set of rules. It's better when you have a referee and linesman because you have a judge. There's judges. And here's the thing about the politics of a democracy, or in other words, a democratic politics. A democratic politics, in order not to spill over into conflict, must reside somewhere between cooperation, consensus, and competition. And those three C's can only function if there is a commonly agreed upon set of rules which guide how things are going to happen or how the game is played. And that's why we have constitutions. That's why we have laws, because they are the things that we all commonly subscribe to, isn't it? If we break the law, what happens? Huh? Yeah, you're supposed to be arrested. I like the fact that you said you're supposed to be arrested. And that's important. And it's important for governance. We'll see why. So, look at the consequences in the table when you get this, when you get the handouts in your email. Look at the table that I drew up for you. Look at the consequences, the social and institutional consequences if you have too much conflict. And I will briefly touch on them. If you have too much conflict, institutions can't function, right? Can they function? No, because everyone's fighting. If institutions are not functioning, can you make proper decisions? No. Can you have proper debate? No. Then we are talking purely about politics, and a form of politics which can veer into a dictatorship, because whoever can wield or capture the most amount of power will be the ones who dominate. No rules apply. The question of equality goes out the window. The question of freedoms and liberty goes out the window. Right? So, who here would like to live in the middle of the DRC? I know she wants to go because she wants to help solve the conflict. But ordinarily, is that where you would choose to go live? No. Somalia? So, do you see what happens when there is no agreement or respect for the commonly agreed set of rules when you want to have a democratic politics. So a democratic politics is firstly and has to be underpinned by a commonly agreed set of rules. Of course, what those rules are and how the rules operate depend on the very early question we asked. That is about the formation of the political community. Who is in, who is out? On what basis they are in, on what basis they are out. So when you break a set of rules, so in a soccer game, for example, you break a serious rule, what happens? Get a red card. You get off the field. You are excommunicated for a period from that political community, aren't you? If you if you commit a less serious offense, a foul, for example, you might get a yellow card. So you get a warning. You get some kind of sanction or punishment. So democratic politics are dependent firstly on the construction of the rules. The rules themselves must seem to be fair. First condition, they must be seen to be fair. They must be seen to be equally applicable. So you can't have one set of rules for me and another set of rules for Angelo, and another set of rules for Karuna, and another set of rules for Jerome. They have to be consistent, they have to be equally applicable, they must generally be fair, and there must be, in addition to consistency, there must be a degree of predictability. Now, why does this matter? Why does this matter for governance? If you're driving, I imagine many of you drive. No. Yes. Okay, let's just say you all drive. Would you be tempted to stop at the red light? Yeah. Yeah, because these days in South Africa, you can't ask, must you stop at the red light? Everything's dependent on how you feel. You'll be tempted to stop at the red light, right? If you're not tempted to stop at the red light and I'm not tempted to stop at the red light, what's going to happen? Kaboom. That happens if we're both on the road at the same time. What if there was only me and there were no other cars on the road? Then should I be tempted? Now, again, I'm not asking are you or must you be. I'm asking should you be tempted to stop at the red light? Yes. Why? Why not? Okay, so you're going to yield. So again, your context matters. Can you see the context matters? But let's take away the context. Take away the context. Say we were living in a safe, free society where threats to women were not real. I'm imagining now. Then must you stop at the red light? Huh? Yes, you must. Because you can't predict what's going to happen, right? Now we know that when you foresaw the consequences, when you said, okay, if there are more than two of us on the road, definitely you must stop at the red light. Uh, if, like Thakira, you are feeling a little bit apprehensive because of the high levels of violence against women and so on, contextually you'll yield, you'll see it as a yield. You're still trying to take some preventative action, right? But here you are worried about self-preservation. You aren't worried about the rules yet. Now let me ask you this. Say we're still in that equal ideal society, the lovely society where everything's rainbows and unicorns. But there are still rules that apply, and part of those rules are that you must stop at the red light. So we're still in the ideal society, right? Will you stop? Yes, because the rule said so. If there was no chance that you would be caught, so forget the consequences that you're going to have an accident or something will happen to you. So we're not talking now about self preservation, we're talking merely about complying to the rule. Would you stop? Yes. What if there was no chance of being caught? Would you stop? Some of you are saying no, some of you are saying yes. Now, you see, when you devise rules, you got to devise rules to consider the rational actor. Has anyone ever heard of the rational actor? Who's the rational actor? So here's another important construct for you to consider. Take notes if you must. The rational actor is the person who behaves in a way which maximizes their gain and minimizes their pain. That's the rational actor, right? In commerce, they call it utility maximization or profit maximization. So you want to minimize your pain and you want to maximize your gain. In commerce, you want to minimize your cost and you want to maximize your profit. Now, when you devise rules, remember again, we said you must devise rules. Either you can devise rules because you want to promote cooperation, or you want to devise rules because you want to prevent conflict. Now, the thing about rules and the rational actor is that when the rational actor believes they can get away with doing something, they will do so. So, even in our ideal society, you know that if you skip the red light and there's little chance of you being caught, you'll go ahead and skip the red light, right? Because there's no chance of you being caught. So, a second condition about rules, other than the first set of conditions, was what? They must be consistent, they must be fair, they must be equally applicable, and they must be predictable or relatively predictable. Now, the thing about consistency and predictability, when you consider the rational actor, is that there must be a real consequence to you having broken the rule. Because in the absence of consequences, you'll go ahead and simply disregard the rule. If you can get away with not stopping at a red light, you'll get away with it. So the rational actor always tries to maximize their gain. I'm not going to stop. I'll save time. I'll save petrol, whatever. But if they knew that they were going to be caught, what will they do? They'll stop. So all systems of rules are dependent on whether there is not only fairness, consistency, equal applicability, and predictability, but that there is a predictability of consequence. And the predictability of consequence is dependent on whether you will get caught or you won't get caught. Then it's dependent on what sanction is applied if you break the rule rather than if you comply with the rule. You with me? I know it sounds like a bit of an aside, but it's not. You'll see why. So, are you all firm or you all happy with the idea of politics? Yes? You all relatively okay with the idea of democracy? You all relatively okay with the idea of democratic politics? Now, the reason I spoke about rules is I now want to talk about governance and democratic governance. Competition. So, what have you got? Competition. So, let's start with the one extreme. The one extreme is consensus. Everyone agrees with everything. It's a bit boring, but it's necessary at some points. So consensus on the one extreme, right? On the other extreme is conflict, right? In between is cooperation. You got it? Cooperation, competition, and part of competition is contestation. Now, remember what I said about rules. If you have a relatively good set of rules, you're best able to navigate consensus for cooperation, but you're better able to promote cooperation through competition and contestation. Because we said we want to avoid conflict. And remember, in the scenario of conflict, the rules simply don't apply. Now, the point I'm trying to make to you is that when you have the set of rules and there is no predictability and consistency in the application of the rules, then you might potentially come quite close to conflict, even though you've got a well codified set of rules. But if no one is respecting those rules for whatever reason, because they can get away with not respecting it, because they can get away with breaking it, because they can get away with doing whatever it is they want, there's no threat of sanction or punishment, you will end up in conflict. Why? Because if you believe you don't have to respect the rules, I'll believe the same. And none of us will respect the rules. With me? Yes? You look a little puzzled. You're fine. Okay. So, we all fine with those things, ne? So let's just shift gear. Let's just shift gear for a moment. When I say, so I asked you what you thought about politics, what you thought about democracy. We spoke a bit about democratic politics. And I want to talk about governance. What is governance? And remember, one of the aspects we said about politics is that it's the administration and management of power and the use of authority. Right. So what is governance then? What do we mean by governance? If someone told you, and you spoke early on about governance, what did you mean? The process of governing the state. But isn't there governance in the room? Is there no governance in this room? The state has nothing to do with us. Yeah, it's about the process of implementing the rules. In part, yes. But remember, the politics is about the competition. So it may be about systematizing it, yes. That is governance. Huh? Oh, I thought you had a. So you're saying it's about oversight. It's an aspect. So you're all right. Absolutely. That's what governance is about. It's about management, it's about administration, it's about the process, it's about having all of those things properly documented, and it's about the application of the rules. Right. So, like politics, like democracy, governance has many different meanings. So again, when people throw out the term, and you'll see people just talk, they just throw out the term, contextualize what it is that they actually mean by governance. Now, in the same way that we spoke about the imposition of democracy, a set of normative values on politics, we can have the same. We can have a set of values which are imposed on governance. So, you can have a set of values which are imposed on the process of administration, on the process of management, and on the process of distributing resources. And that's why people talk about effective government or effective governance. Now, government is different from governance. Okay? Governance happens in all places in which a process has to be managed and administered, or in all processes in which resources have to be distributed. So, in this very room, when we spoke about the very early example, there is a process of governance, not necessarily government, but governance. Why? Because when you applied, who did you apply to? Muhammad and Karuna. There was a set of rules, right? There was a set of criteria. When you gave your voluntary consent to be part of it, those rules start to apply. If someone breaks those rules, there is a sanction or there may be a penalty. So governance happens everywhere. It happens in companies, it happens in businesses, it happens in schools, it happens in life. Public governance means the distribution, the management, the administration of public power. And public power, again, comes back to our early question about the formation of the political community, because public power, public governance, has to do with the administration of authority for the commons, for everyone, not for a select group. So our rules of governance for our class, for our event this week, apply only to us. Does it apply to other students at Wits? No. So governance is also location dependent. In other words, it is dependent on the set of relationships and the purpose for which it is used. Right now, we said we want to impose a set of normative values. We want to impose a set of things on administration, because administration can be neutral. Management can be neutral. Neutral in the sense that there is no values attached to it. But we're saying we want democratic governance. So the first thing that needs to be required for, and we already tried to understand what is democracy, right? So how would you now take the values of democracy and impose them on governance? So the first condition for democratic governance has to be equality and inclusivity. Because that set of rules must apply on that set of people. So it has to be inclusive and it has to be equal. The second is that there must be some process of supervision, oversight, and accountability. So the first condition, to repeat, was what? Inclusive and equal. The second is that there must be huh, supervision and oversight. Now, if we just take the idea of supervision and oversight, What else comes to mind for you? Sure, maybe, maybe. Isn't it responsibility and obligation? Because flowing, who's going to supervise who and for what? And how do you hold someone accountable unless they are responsible for doing something or having an obligation? So the third set of criteria is obligation and responsibility. Now imagine if you have obligation or responsibility to do something and you simply don't do it. What happens? Nothing. And in order to make it happen, you have to exercise oversight and demand accountability, isn't it? And you can only do that if the first condition is satisfied. That means everyone's equal and there is inclusivity. So let's take those three. So you got the three constructs, right? What's the first one? Yeah, the second one? I don't understand why you're so speaking to yourself. Can't hear you. Yeah, and the third? So again, now take that and localize it to our own context, our class. First condition was inclusion, right? If I were not included, could you have any expectation on me? No. So you can't apply any of the rules on me. Huh? All right. Which is why the question of inclusivity is vital for any form of democratic government. Therefore, flowing from that, all of these weird politics which is beginning to take root at the moment about inclusion and exclusion, who is in the political community, who is out, whether it be based on race, other forms of identity. Do you see what dangers it might hold if you constantly make people feel as if they are not included in the political community? Because then the set of governance rules, what? Don't apply to them. And therefore, you can't hold them accountable. Which is why, even in our current context, for those people who we wish to hold accountable for the crimes of apartheid, whatever they might be, if you consistently start to define them outside of the included political community, it is very hard to extract any kind of restorative justice from them. Why? Because they feel, shit, we're not part of the political community anymore, so therefore we stand outside of it. Are you following me? Huh? Which is why the idea of extremist forms of politics which are exclusionary hold a lower and lesser prospect for justice or social justice. Therefore, that condition of inclusivity, of making people feel as if they're a part of it, not only keeps them in the system, also provides a better opportunity to be able to demand a level of extraction from them. You look very puzzled. Yeah, don't think of equality in terms of the distribution of income or how much you have. Think about equality purely and solely and narrowly on the basis of inclusion and exclusion from the system. So the inequality, remember what we said about democracy. Democracy can distribute a lot of power and equality, but not socio-economically, only in terms of your rights and obligations. Yeah. Okay, so I know you don't have the handout in front of you, so I'm going to run through some of the other stuff on it. Yeah. No, yeah, I know you know it's all in your emails, right? So before I come to the more practical stuff around policy, I want to just make sure that we have a fairly concrete and solid idea of politics, democracy, governance, and democratic governance. Now, remember, we said that when we form the political community, we form it so that we can define a process in which to make decisions. That's the first basic condition, right? Everything else will flow from that. Whether it's accountability, whether it's about administration, whether it's about anything else. Now, in modern societies, how do we go about making decisions? Do we all commonly decide on everything every day? No. Why? Simple, because it's just impractical. You can't do it. So what do? We have elections. We have elections. Why do we have elections? We have elections so that we all commonly come together in order to make a decision or decisions about who must govern us for that period. Now, that we have made a decision and we conferred authority to a set of people to do so doesn't doesn't mean that you now sit back, right? Because you can still hold them to account. You can still expect that they would be responsive, and you have the power to oversee them. Why? Yes, because of the system. And the system must have processes and structures. And that's why, in our early definition of politics, the question of process remains important. So everything must be process driven. If you don't have a process, it is very difficult to come to conclusions. And all processes have to be governed by a set of rules. That's why the loop or the circle between rules, decision, power, authority, and accountability goes in this loop. Can you see how each one is dependent on something that happened before? So, the whole question of governance, the whole question of politics, the whole question of democracy, all of them together can't exist in isolation if you want a reasonable set of balances in how the system works. Now, I know the obvious question you're asking is that if we decided in 1994 that we have both a democracy and democratic governance or democratic government, how come we still have so much inequality? So why do you think we still have so much inequality? Buddy, no one knows. So anything you say is gonna. Right. So we're touching one aspect. Historically, There's a set of people who refuse to take responsibility for what happened. Now, if those people, and remember the early point again, if those people continuously feel excluded rather than included in the system, remember what I said, the chance of extracting a greater amount of accountability or forcing people to feel responsible for something, the first condition that has to be satisfied is that they must feel included. Right. So there's two. So you're coming up with two reasons. One is the failure of taking responsibility. The second is the question of legacy, things which perpetuate itself through history. So two reasons. A third reason, a failure of democratic government. So I'm not invalidating the other two reasons. They are vital. But there is a third reason. And the third reason is ineffective government. Because why? No, I mean, if a government decides that it is not going to take responsibility for providing toilets at schools, can you see how that starts to perpetuate the problems, the inequalities, the underdevelopment? So, three reasons we've come up with so far. So now we've got a fourth reason, right? So we've got four reasons now. The first is historical legacy. The second was inability to take responsibility. The third is ineffective government and government failure. And the fourth is a lax attitude to exercising citizen agency, because that's what you're talking about, right? People, citizens not exercising their agency to the extent that they should in terms of taking responsibility for what should happen. There was another hand here, and there was a hand there. No, madam? So we can consign misuse of power as ineffective government. All right. Okay, so yeah, it makes sense. You're right. But I would like for us, please, guys, to get away from the fancy terminology that's too woke. Because I'd like us to be very clear on the concept. So you're not wrong, but it applies to the question of inclusion and exclusion, right? Those people were systematically, whether for social or other reasons, excluded, right? So We're still sitting with our four. We're still sitting with our four. Corruption, yes, and I would put that as part of ineffective government. So we've got four big. So I'm talking about big concepts here, eh? Not talking about the detail. Talking about the big concepts. Vision. But buddy, you're right. The government doesn't have a vision, but the government didn't find itself there. Who put it there? But the government says there's a whole national development plan. It's a vision. No, you may find it a lie, and it may in fact be a lie, but you can't say that there isn't a vision. They're telling you here's a vision. I can show you what it is. So we're still sitting with our four. Yeah, we're competing with the aircon and you don't have a mic. So you must scream. So can we call that ineffective government again, irrespective of what the source of the ineffectiveness is? So we're still sitting with our four big areas. But what about BEE or triple BEE or quadruple BEE? But I mean, if you ask the president, he will tell you it worked brilliantly. Ineffective government. Takira, you mustn't speak to me or yourself. So can't we call that part of the historical legacy? Okay. So we can still consign that to ineffective government because it's or ineffective representation and responsiveness, right? So we're still sitting with our four big concepts. So remember, guys, I'm not asking for reasons. I'm asking for a big concept for why we think things didn't turn out. We agreed. One is the historical legacy, two is ineffective government, three is ineffective exercise of citizen agency. Yeah, explain. But then that's down to his point of not exercising your citizen agency responsibly. Would you agree that India is poor? But okay, shh. So you said India is poor, right? In your terms, you just described it. You described is Lesotho poor? Would you consider Lesotho democratic? Yeah, there's a king, but the king doesn't have power. I want you to think, he's raising a very important point. I want you to think about this poverty. Can we isolate poverty and make it the fifth reason? Give us a concrete example of inappropriate values. Okay, gotcha. Everyone get him. Would you call that ethics? Can I call it ethics? Okay. So we've got our fifth one now, ethics. Brother, you're still dwelling on poverty. Hmm? So you agree with him, it's poverty. No, 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 don't use other words. It's poverty, right? Poverty is poverty, it's income poverty. You can't do certain things because you're just too poor to do it. Do we agree? But I mean, whether you're poor or not, are you disincentivized from voting if you are poor? Okay, then tell me how it's more complicated. So you're all on the right track. I'm with you. You're all on the right track, but I would insist that it's not poverty. It's something else. It's related to poverty. No, how does your right? What does it cost you to vote? Yeah, tell me what. Okay, fair enough. Does it cost you anything to have a political view? Does it cost you? No. Are you saying my mother can't think? She doesn't have education. She doesn't. But what? What? Okay, so what did that cost her? Okay, let me pose an alternative question. Um, forget the cost of a thought. What does what does it cost you to have a belief? A position. Okay. Does it cost you to have a belief? To believe something? Would it cost you anything? Yeah. No, you telling me I must take it a priori that it's going to cost me something to believe in God. I'm telling you, no, it doesn't. Whether I believe in God or not is costless to me. No, I'm asking you. What would so what? Okay, so tell me something you believe. Okay. Does it cost you anything to believe? No, to believe. I'm not asking about practice. I'm asking to believe. Does it cost you anything to believe? Does it cost you anything to express a view to me if you're in the street? Anyway,
Answering the question, I just wanted to say something on one of the reasons why after 1980. So, I want to say population, but I feel like that's something that should be predicted by each and every government that is obviously not controlling it at this very time.
population growth.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless, yeah, because so far our government hasn't like acted in trying to sort of like bring population up and just distributing condoms and everything else.
There was an economist called Robert Malthus who believed at some stage that curbing or controlling population growth is the way to greater prosperity and development. So it is a view. Yeah. Uh, it is a view, and it is one explanation people use for why there may be underdevelopment or uh, a lack of wealth. Yeah. No, no. It's a good question, but it's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, so we all said we agree on the idea of politics, governance, democratic governance. We agree, right? We agree also about that loop of a virtuous cycle, that if you have that, you should have good outcomes. So then I pose the question, but why don't we have such great outcomes since 1994, right? And then we said, well, let's look at criteria for why and how we can extract justice or how we can have proper democratic government. And we said certain conditions. inclusion and equality, accountability, oversight, supervision, responsibility, responsiveness, right? We agreed on all of that, right? Now we said, okay, let's find reasons for why our democratic government, because we believe we have one, or the system, the way in which it's worked, hasn't given us great outcomes. And we came up with 4 reasons so far. Those reasons are, oh, we had five, sorry, he added ethics. So we had five, right? One, we had a legacy issue, the question of apartheid, of history, the shaping of social conditions, structural factors. Legacy and structural factors, one. Second, we said ineffective government, inability of government to prioritize, choose the right decisions, behave poorly, do the wrong thing, etc. So ineffective government. Then he said lack of citizen agency, or lack of responsible citizen agency, or in civil society. Four. Uh, then we said ethics. And he's saying now poverty. And I'm saying maybe it's not poverty, but there is related to poverty something called inequality. Now, in societies in which the inequality differential is far too great, or the inequality gap is too wide, if you add the idea of those people I spoke about, remember the rational actor, the one who minimizes their gain and minimizes their pain and maximizes their gain. Remember that one? When you have the combination of those factors and you have very high levels of inequality, those who already have access to some amounts of power game the system to again maximize whatever power and benefits they got. So inequality, in addition to ethics or lack of ethics, is what I would identify as the fifth factor. Yes, it can, but you can undo historical legacies through effective government. It is possible. Where? The TRC. No, I would say the TRC is actually one of the contributors to our problems because their lack of responsibility, lack of accountability to take responsibility for what happened. Yes, in part, in concept, yes, but in operation it failed, but it also failed because of its design. Now, the question was, did it happen some way? Yes, it did happen. Perhaps not in the perfect way, but post Victorian Britain went about developing the society in precisely that way. Now, there are dualities of inclusion and exclusion and all of that. But at the time at which, in historical periods, Britain transitioned out of the Victorian era, levels of inequality were extremely high, government performance was poor, because it coincided with the Industrial Revolution. Rational actors were gaming the system. But they realized the social crisis they were in. Now remember, we're not blind to the fact that Victorian Britain also embarked on colonial expansion and acquisition and could fund its own development through that. I mean, that historical contingency is important. What I'm pointing to is that when societies are faced with that level of crisis, very high inequality, very high levels of exploitation, the transition of a world system from one phase of historical development, feudalism at the time, transitioning into modern capitalism. A different form and different types of politics are required. And so, what they did for their own society at the time is that hard ideology was sublimated. That doesn't mean that they didn't have principles or they didn't have ideological convictions or persuasions. But the way in which the institutions developed developed in a slightly more neutral and less ideological way. Why? Because the institutions had to be geared to solving certain problems. So they were still animated by principle, right? And what did they try to do? Well, first thing they tried to do was reduce the level of inequality. How? By introducing social protections. So the development of the welfare state can be traced back to that time. So reduce the absolute levels of poverty, reduce the levels of inequality, reorient institutions, de-ideologize them, reduce the conflictual aspects of politics towards more cooperative and competitive aspects of politics. So again, now I'm not going into the greatest detail. I'm just giving you the broad concepts by which they decided the society, in order to evolve or to become better than it is, needs to do these things. Now you can't ignore the fact that, of course, those things require resources, and they got the resources from elsewhere, and so on. What I'm trying to suggest is that we have a set of resources in our society which should be sufficient for us to address some of our social problems. Now, how do we go about doing so? And my argument is that it can be done so if you have effective democratic government. Because democracy as a system, while I said cannot facilitate socio-economic equality, can facilitate it. It does not guarantee it, but it facilitates it. Why? Because of inclusion and equality or equal application of the principles. Second, because of proper oversight, accountability, and responsiveness. And third, what was the third? People taking responsibility and effective supervision. Now, all of those concepts, oversight, accountability, responsiveness, supervision, I spell out in the notes that you are going to receive. I want to focus on one last bit before we move on to, again, grander concepts. So now we're going to talk about something a lot more practical before we talk about the notions of justice and so on with Angela this afternoon. Now, all of these big concepts I spoke about, you will get in your notes. I want to focus on something more practical. Now, the practical thing is that we said, right, in order to address this, we want better democratic government. That's the point at which we concluded, right? Better democratic government, because you spoke about vision. Democratic what, Bani? Is there a difference between democratic effectiveness and democratic deficiency? Well, no, they're not. They're completely opposite. Democratic deficiencies means there are deficiencies in the way in which the democracy functions. So you either don't have enough space for voice, you don't have enough space for choice, you don't have enough space for conscience, for belief. That's democratic deficit. But you can have deficits in democratic government too, and we've got that. Institutions don't function properly, decisions are made in isolation from it being responsive. Uh, Institutions are not doing what they are supposed to be doing, but doing something for a narrow slice of people who are dominant. Those are all deficits. Effectiveness would be the complete opposite. Now, again, effectiveness is not magically going to bring about perfect equality, but it will create conditions for less inequality. Oh, no. You see, you could have, yes, they are related. And I know that you would be tempted to believe that democratic ineffectiveness and democratic deficiencies are the same thing. They are not, right? Democratic deficiencies would be a deficiency or a lack or an imperfection or a problem in the design of the democracy or the democratic system. So, let's take the question, what did I say? First marker of democratic government? Inclusiveness, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of exclusions, whether by law or otherwise, that's a democratic deficit. It's in the design of the system. If you have lack of accountability, if we take the second score, that's in design. Inefficiency could just be that you've got the right design, but it's just not working properly. So there is a difference. There is a difference. And our problems are not so much that there is democratic deficiencies. Because our system on paper sounds pretty good. Ours is about democratic ineffectiveness. And we traced 5 reasons why. 5 reasons why. One is the historical legacy. Two is ineffective government. Three is lack of responsible citizen agency. Fourth is ethics and priorities. And fifth is inequality. Happy? With me? Fine? Some of you look puzzled. Mera, you look puzzled. Okay, so we've spoken about very big concepts. We've spoke about very big things. I want to talk very quickly about something really practical. Because you spoke about vision just now, Lucanio. And vision is also a very grand thing. Philip, you were talking about vision. Yeah. Now, I want to shift focus away from these grand things. I'm not going to talk about vision. One of the things that can underline an effective democratic government with proper oversight, accountability, and responsiveness is to devise appropriate policy. Right? What should policy look like? So now I'm talking about something very practical. It still sounds conceptual, and it is, but it is very practical. So, and this will also be in your notes. So, what is policy? If someone tells you policy, what do you understand by the word policy? It's a set of guiding actions, something which gives you direction. It's about setting direction. It's about telling you what you should do and why you want to do it. That's the simple understanding of it. It's a set of guidelines which tells you what you want to do, how you want to do it, and what you want to achieve. So, like all of the other things, policy can also mean different things to different people, right? One aspect of it is direction setting to bring about a vision. The second, because it's a set of rules, it's direction setting, it's setting a direction, it's telling you what you want to do. Like we spoke about rules which can either prevent something or promote something, policy does the same thing. You develop policy as a rule to either prevent something happening, something bad, or promoting something happening, something good. So, like rules, policy can also be used in order to prevent something or to promote something. So, it sets direction, it prevents bad, it promotes good. Because it's direction setting, it prescribes a course of action, a plan of what to do. But in order to devise that plan, it first has to identify the problem. So you can't have policy without identifying the problem. So if you devise a policy, you must identify the problem. So Angelo made a policy when we started. Your phone must be, what did you say? Silent, off. I just broke the policy. Ah, and involved you. Sorry, I made you complicit in breaking the rules. So why did he want that policy? Why did he want that as direction? Why did he want that to prevent what? What was he promoting or preventing? Hmm? Right. He was promoting or preventing disruption of me or him, preventing your distraction, and promoting a proper discussion. So you see how sometimes people use words and it sounds very fancy and you think you don't understand what it is. Well, actually, you do when you just break it down to what its components are. So we said we have to identify the problem. The problem in that case would have been disruption and distraction. Now, even public policy, that's private policy, that's policy amongst us. Even public policy must follow the same thing. It is what public problem are you trying to address? What public good are you trying to promote? And what public bad are you trying to prevent? So let's start at the top end of what policy does. So when you decide what you're trying to promote and what you're trying to prevent, you must ask yourself, what is the intended impact? What is the outcome? What do you want to come out of it? So do you see why I'm saying now it's really practical stuff? So the first question you ask, what would be the impact? What do I want to come out of it? The second is what would be the outcome? What is the change I want to bring about? So when you make up a policy, when you set direction, you ask yourself, what is the change I want to come about? What is the change I want to achieve? So you've got the impact, right? Then you got the outcome. Then you will have the output. The output would be, what do I need to do in order for this to happen? What do I need to do in order for the outcome to be achieved? That's the output. Then you will have one step lower, an activity. What work must I do in order to bring about that output or that output? That's the activity. What must I do practically? Then you have to ask, what inputs do I need in order to do this activity? In other words, what resources are required? What activities and how do I pay for those activities? How do I go about doing those activities? What will I need? That's the inputs. So you got that. The impact, the outcome, the output, the activity, the input. Now there's a second set of things you would do because you want to measure how well or how badly you are doing. So you will need some indicators. That means, how do you measure the change that you achieved or didn't achieve? What was your target and how far away or near to achieving that are you? And in order to do that, you have to consistently monitor. Otherwise, how else do you know? In the process of monitoring, depending on how far or how close you are, you then have to apply some kind of corrective action, isn't it? Are you on course? Are you off course? How do you need to get back on course? Are there things you need? Are there things you don't need? Can you do away with doing certain things? Are you wasting your time? You'll never know that until you monitor it. And then We come back to the higher order, again, another circle. Who's responsible for what? Are they doing it? Are they not doing it? How do I get them to do it? So again, you'll have to impose sanction, you'll have to punish them, or you'll have to ask them nicely to do something. So again, the question of supervision and oversight matters. So do you see how in governance and in democratic governance specifically, things go in these loops, in these circles? And if there's a break in one part of the circle, you have to patch it up, right? If sometimes if you patch up that hole, another hole will open. And at some point, there is no system that's going to patch up the hole. So your basic values, your ethics, the fifth thing we identified as one of the reasons why we might not be achieving the outcomes we have is the question of ethics. So at some point, no matter how well you devise a system, the system can't be fixed until and unless you have the right values and the right ethics. Okay, are we good? That's the end of me until later in the week. Thank you very much.